Imagine a world not unlike our own, full of busy cities and bustling trade routes. Now, picture a silent, invisible terror sweeping across that world, a force so powerful it would change humanity forever. This was the reality of the Black Death. It was a devastating pandemic that began its most destructive journey in the mid-14th century, specifically around the year 1347. This wasn't just a local outbreak of sickness, it was a global catastrophe that reached from the vast plains of Asia to the farthest corners of Europe and North Africa. It moved with a speed and ferocity that seemed unnatural, a dark tide that no one could hold back. The impact of this plague was almost unimaginable. Historians estimate that in just a few short years it wiped out between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. Think about that for a moment. In some towns and villages, more than half of the people simply vanished. The world's population as a whole dropped dramatically, falling from around 475 million to perhaps 350 million. It was a loss of life on a scale that had never been seen before and has rarely been seen since. The Black Death did more than just kill, it shattered the very foundations of society and left deep scars on the human psyche for generations to come. This great pestilence got its name, the Black Death, from one of its most terrifying symptoms. Those who fell ill often developed dark, blackish patches on their skin, caused by bleeding underneath. But the name also perfectly captures the mood of the era. It was a time of immense darkness, fear, and sorrow. People felt helpless, as if a great and terrible shadow had fallen over their world, extinguishing the light of life wherever it touched. The suddenness and scale of the dying left survivors in a state of shock, questioning everything they knew about medicine, their leaders, and even their faith in God. The story of the Black Death is more than just a grim tale from history. It is a profound story about human vulnerability and resilience. It shows us how societies react when faced with a threat they cannot understand or control. It reveals the best and worst of human nature, from selfless acts of kindness to horrific acts of cruelty driven by fear. By looking back at this dark chapter, we can begin to understand not only the past but also the challenges we face today when new diseases emerge. It is a timeless lesson in how knowledge, or the lack of it, can shape the destiny of millions. If you found this story fascinating, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more history brought to life. Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you for watching. The journey of the Black Death began long before it reached the shores of Europe. Scientists now believe the plague originated somewhere in the arid plains of Central Asia in the 1330s. The culprit was a tiny, unseen bacterium named Yersinia pestis. This deadly germ found a perfect home in fleas, which in turn lived on the backs of small rodents, particularly black rats. These rats were common travelers, stowing away on merchant caravans and ships, moving silently alongside silks, spices, and other valuable goods. They were the perfect carriers for a disease that was about to conquer the known world, an invisible army marching along humanity's most vital trade routes. The plague's arrival in Europe was dramatic and horrific. In October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships sailed into the Sicilian port of Messina after a long journey from the Black Sea. But when the townspeople gathered at the docks, they were met with a ghastly sight. Most of the sailors on board were either dead or gravely ill. The survivors were weak, feverish, and covered in strange, painful black boils. The Sicilian authorities, in a panic, ordered the death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. The plague had already jumped ashore, carried by the rats and fleas that scurried from the ships into the unsuspecting city. One of the most chilling events in the plague's spread involved an early and brutal form of biological warfare. Before arriving in Sicily, the Genoese traders had been at their trading post of Kaffa in the Crimea. The city was under siege by a Mongol army, which had become afflicted by the plague. In a desperate and cruel tactic, the Mongol commander ordered his soldiers to use their giant catapults to hurl the infected corpses of their dead soldiers over the city walls. The disease quickly spread among the terrified defenders. When the Genoese traders fled Kaffa by sea, they unknowingly carried the plague with them, ensuring its passage into the heart of Europe. From Messina, the plague spread with terrifying speed. It was a networked world, connected by sea and land, and the disease exploited every connection. It moved north into mainland Italy, devastating cities like Florence and Venice. From there it followed the trade routes into France, Spain, and England. Within 5 years it had reached as far as Scandinavia and Russia. No kingdom was safe, No castle wall was high enough to keep it out. The very pathways that had brought wealth and prosperity to Europe now served as conduits for death, carrying the unseen invader to every corner of the continent. For the people of the 14th century, the signs of the plague were as mysterious as they were terrifying. The most common and infamous form of the disease was the bubonic plague. Its telltale sign was the appearance of buboes, agonizingly painful swellings in the lymph nodes. These would typically appear in the groin, armpits, or on the neck. The buboes would start small but could quickly grow to the size of an apple or an egg. They were filled with pus and blood, and as the disease progressed they would often turn black, giving the plague its fearsome name. The sight of these swellings was a virtual death sentence, filling victims and their families with dread. The buboes were just the beginning of the ordeal. Once the infection took hold, a victim would be seized by a host of other debilitating symptoms. A high fever would set in, accompanied by intense chills that would leave the person shaking uncontrollably. This was often followed by extreme fatigue, vomiting, and severe aches and pains throughout the body. Many victims also experienced diarrhea and bled from various parts of their body. The disease attacked with incredible speed. A person who was perfectly healthy in the morning could be dead by nightfall. The swiftness of the plague's assault was one of its most frightening aspects. While the bubonic form was the most widespread, the plague could manifest in other, even deadlier ways. The pneumonic plague infected the lungs. This form was especially dangerous because it could be spread directly from person to person through coughing or even breathing, without the need for fleas. Its symptoms included a bloody cough and severe chest pains, and it was almost always fatal. An even more rapid and terrifying version was the septicemic plague, which occurred when the bacteria infected the bloodstream directly. This form killed so quickly, sometimes within hours, that victims often died before any buboes or other major symptoms had time to develop. The combination of these horrifying symptoms and the disease's high mortality rate created a climate of absolute terror. Imagine watching your loved ones develop these signs, knowing that there was almost nothing you could do. The black spots, the painful swellings, the raging fever, it all seemed like a malevolent force was consuming the body from the inside out. People were not just afraid of dying, they were afraid of the agonizing and undignified way the plague killed. This deep, primal fear would go on to shape how people behaved, tearing apart the very fabric of their communities as the pestilence continued its relentless march. In the 14th century, the world had no concept of germs, bacteria, or viruses. The scientific tools to understand the true cause of the Black Death simply did not exist. Instead, people relied on old theories and superstitions to explain the catastrophe unfolding around them. The most widely accepted theory was that the plague was caused by miasma, which meant bad air. It was believed that a poisonous vapor, released by earthquakes or carried by unfavorable winds, was corrupting the atmosphere and causing the disease. This idea led people to try to purify the air by burning aromatic woods like juniper, or by carrying bouquets of flowers and herbs to sniff. This belief in miasma directly led to the creation of one of history's most iconic and spooky images, the plague doctor. Though this figure became more common in later outbreaks, the concept began during this time. Doctors would wear long, heavy coats and a distinctive mask with a long, bird-like beak. This beak was not just for show, it was stuffed with fragrant herbs, spices, and straw. The idea was that these pleasant smells would filter out the poisonous miasma before the doctor breathed it in. While it offered no real protection against a flea bite, the costume did provide some barrier from the patient, and it added to the terrifying atmosphere of the plague years. With no effective treatments available, people turned to a wide range of desperate and often harmful cures. Physicians, following ancient medical traditions, commonly practiced bloodletting. They believed that sickness was caused by an imbalance of the four humors in the body, and that draining blood would restore this balance. They would also lance the buboes, hoping to release the poison from the body. Other remedies were even more bizarre. People were told to drink vinegar, consume crushed emeralds, or place a live chicken on their buboes to draw out the sickness. None of these methods worked, and many likely made the patient's condition worse. Beyond these medical attempts, many people believed the plague was a divine punishment from God, a sign of his anger at a sinful world. This led to extreme acts of religious devotion. One of the most famous examples was the flagellant movement. Groups of people would travel from town to town, publicly whipping themselves and each other with leather straps tipped with metal. They believed that by inflicting this pain upon themselves, they could show their repentance and convince God to lift the plague. Ironically, their continuous travel and large gatherings only helped to spread the disease further, a tragic consequence of their desperate faith. The sheer terror inspired by the Black Death caused a catastrophic breakdown of social order. The fear of contagion was so powerful that it, overwhelmed the most basic human bonds of family and community. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through the plague in Florence, wrote that brother abandoned brother, uncle his nephew, sister her brother, and in many cases wife her husband. Most horrifically, he noted that even parents refused to nurse their own sick children, as if they were not their own. People became so afraid of catching the disease that they would, honestly, flee from anyone showing even the slightest sign of illness. This fear led to a horrifying reality for the sick. Once a person fell ill, they were often completely alone. Healthy family members would lock them in their rooms or abandon the house altogether, leaving the sick to die in isolation. Homes that were once filled with warmth and life became silent tombs. The streets were often filled with the dead and dying, as there was no one left who was willing or able to care for them or provide a proper burial. Agnolo di Tura, a chronicler from Siena, Italy, wrote a heartbreaking account of burying his own 5 children with his own hands, adding that so many died that all believed it was the end of the world. The normal rhythms of daily life came to a complete halt. Shops closed, farms were left untended, and government offices were deserted. The institutions that held society together just, ceased to function. Priests and doctors who were on the front lines died in huge numbers, leaving communities without spiritual guidance or medical care. The sound of church bells, which once marked the hours of the day, now rang almost constantly for funerals, until they too fell silent, because there were not enough living people left to ring them. The world that people had known just a few years before had completely disintegrated. In this atmosphere of chaos and despair, people reacted in different ways. Some locked themselves away, hoping to avoid any contact with the outside world. Others, believing their death was inevitable, threw caution to the wind. They formed groups and went from tavern to tavern, drinking and indulging in whatever pleasures they could find, trying to forget the horror surrounding them. Boccaccio described how they would move into abandoned houses, living and feasting on the possessions of the dead. It was a world turned upside down, where the laws of man and the bonds of society had dissolved in the face of overwhelming and inescapable death. When people are faced with a terrifying situation they cannot explain, they often look for someone to blame. In the chaos and fear of the Black Death, this desperate search for answers turned deadly for minority groups across Europe. Lacking any scientific understanding of the plague, many people embraced conspiracy theories. The most widespread and vicious of these was the accusation that Jewish communities were responsible for the plague. Rumors spread like wildfire, claiming that Jews were intentionally poisoning the wells and water supplies of Christian towns in a plot to destroy Christendom. This terrible lie provided a simple, albeit false, explanation for the unexplainable suffering. These accusations led to horrific waves of violence and persecution. Across Europe, but especially in regions of modern-day Germany, Switzerland, and France, entire Jewish communities were targeted. Mobs would round up Jewish men, women, and children, torturing them to extract false confessions before brutally murdering them. In several cities, Jewish people were locked inside their synagogues or homes, which were then set on fire. Thousands were burned alive. These massacres, known as pogroms, were carried out with sickening brutality, fueled by a combination of religious hatred, long-standing prejudice, and the sheer panic caused by the plague. Some leaders did try to stop the violence. Pope Clement VI, for instance, issued 2 official papal bulls in 1348. He stated that the Jews were not to blame, pointing out that they were dying from the plague in the same numbers as Christians. He also noted that the plague was ravaging lands where no Jews lived. He declared that anyone who harmed Jews based on these rumors was being seduced by that liar, the devil. Despite the Pope's powerful condemnation, his words were largely ignored. The fear and hatred were too deeply rooted, and the massacres continued, showing how easily reason can be silenced by mass hysteria. The consequences of this scapegoating were devastating and long-lasting. Hundreds of Jewish communities were completely destroyed. Many of the survivors fled eastward, seeking refuge in Poland and Russia, where rulers offered them greater protection. This migration significantly shifted the demographics of European Jewry for centuries to come. The persecution during the Black Death stands as a dark and tragic reminder of how fear can be weaponized. It shows that in times of crisis, the search for a scapegoat can be just as destructive as the crisis itself, unleashing a tide of human cruelty that compounds the tragedy. The Black Death was a destructive fire that swept across the old medieval world, but from its ashes, a new society began to grow. One of the most profound changes was economic. With so many people dead, there was a massive labor shortage. Suddenly, the peasants and laborers who had survived found themselves in a position of power. There were not enough workers to plow the fields, harvest the crops, or shear the sheep. Landowners and nobles were forced to compete for workers, which meant they had to offer much higher wages and better conditions. This newfound bargaining power began to chip away at the old system of feudalism, where serfs were tied to the land. This shift in power had far-reaching social consequences. For the first time, common people had opportunities for upward mobility. Peasants could demand freedom from their lords and move to find better work, which was unthinkable a generation earlier. This led to the decline of the manor-based economy, and the rise of a new middle class of merchants, artisans, and independent farmers. Of course, the old nobility did not give up its power easily. When they tried to force wages back down, it led to massive uprisings like the famous Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381. The old social order was broken and could never be fully repaired. The plague also shook the foundations of the most powerful institution in medieval Europe, the Catholic Church. The Church had been unable to stop the plague, and its prayers and processions had offered no protection. This failure caused many people to question its authority and power. Furthermore, a huge number of clergy members died, especially those who bravely tended to the sick. They were often replaced by individuals who were less educated and less dedicated, which further weakened the Church's reputation. This growing disillusionment helped plant the seeds for major religious changes to come, including the Protestant Reformation a century and a half later. Finally, the Black Death even changed the way people communicated. Before the plague, Latin was the dominant language of government, scholarship, and the church. But many of the educated elites who were fluent in Latin perished. As new people rose to fill their roles, they increasingly used their local vernacular languages, like English, French, and Italian. This contributed to the decline of Latin and the rise of national languages in literature and official documents. In this way, the plague, despite its horror, acted as a powerful agent of change, accelerating a transition away from the medieval era and toward the modern world. It may be surprising to learn that the bacterium that caused the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, did not disappear from the world. It still exists today, living in animal populations in various parts of the globe. The World Health Organization reports that there are still between 1,000 and 3,000 cases of plague each year, with outbreaks occasionally occurring in countries like Madagascar and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Even in the United States, a handful of cases are reported annually, usually in rural western states where people come into contact with infected rodents like prairie dogs or squirrels. The ancient enemy is still with us. However, the thought of another Black Death-level pandemic is no longer a realistic fear. The world has changed dramatically since the 14th century, and our greatest defense is knowledge. In 1894, a scientist named Alexandre Yersin finally identified the tiny bacterium responsible for the disease. We now understand exactly how it spreads, from fleas to rodents to humans. We know that the pneumonic form can spread through the air, and we know how to stop it. This scientific understanding has stripped the plague of its mystery and its power to cause widespread panic based on superstition and fear. The most important difference between now and then is our ability to treat the disease. In the 14th century, a plague diagnosis was a death sentence. Today, the plague is easily treatable with common antibiotics, especially if it is caught early. Simple drugs like tetracycline or doxycycline are highly effective at killing the Yersinia pestis bacteria. This medical advancement means that what was once the most feared pestilence in history is now a manageable infectious disease. Our ability to cure the illness has transformed it from a terrifying monster into a known and defeatable foe. Furthermore, we now have effective public health measures to contain outbreaks before they can spread. When a case is identified, health officials can quickly isolate the patient, trace their contacts, and provide preventative antibiotics to anyone who may have been exposed. We also have better sanitation and pest control, which reduces the rat populations that help the disease thrive. The bacterium itself is also surprisingly fragile. It dies within an hour if exposed to direct sunlight. Thanks to science, medicine, and public health, the plague is no longer a world-ending threat, but a powerful reminder of how far we have come. The story of the Black Death, though rooted in the distant past, holds timeless lessons for us today. It serves as a powerful case study in the battle between two fundamental human responses to crisis, fear, and reason. In the 14th century, without the tools of science, fear was the dominant force. It led to social breakdown, the abandonment of loved ones, and the horrific persecution of innocent people. It drove people to useless cures and dangerous superstitions. This reminds us that fear is a natural response to the unknown, but when it is not guided by knowledge and compassion, it can be incredibly destructive. Comparing the 14th century to our modern world shows the incredible power of science. During the Black Death, humanity was helpless. Today, when a new disease like COVID-19 emerges, scientists can identify and sequence the virus within weeks and develop vaccines in record time. We have diagnostic tests, effective treatments, and global health networks to share information instantly. Science has given us the tools to fight back, to understand our enemy, and to protect ourselves. It has replaced miasma with germ theory and superstition with evidence-based medicine. The greatest lesson from the plague is perhaps the immense value of scientific inquiry and public health infrastructure. However, the Black Death also shows us that scientific progress alone is not enough. Even with all our modern knowledge, recent pandemics have shown that fear, misinformation, and the urge to blame others are still powerful forces in our society. We have seen how quickly conspiracy theories can spread on social media, and how minority groups can be unfairly blamed for a disease. This shows that the human element remains a constant challenge. The internal battle between our fearful instincts and our capacity for rational thought is one we must continue to fight in every new crisis. Ultimately, the history of the Black Death is a story of human resilience. Despite the unimaginable loss and the complete collapse of their world, humanity endured. Societies rebuilt, economies transformed, and new ways of thinking emerged. Survivors came together to create a new future from the ruins of the old one. The plague teaches us that even in our darkest hours, when we feel most helpless, we have the capacity to overcome, to adapt, and to learn. It is a somber but vital reminder that our greatest strength lies not in avoiding crises, but in how we choose to face them, with knowledge, with compassion, and with a commitment to one another. If you found this video insightful, please like and subscribe to our channel for more historical content. Thank you for watching.